congregation's been around for a long time, and since 1852. Let me get to our first building here. There it is. It's our first building on Apple Street, and Paul Wechter's going to run through a little history.
I wasn't here then.
Oh, Paul was not here in 1852. Okay. But Paul, if you would, if you could just share a little bit of the history that you know about our church and things like that. I think you may be our longest member.
Well, that could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you folks represent the new members, I represent the old. I've been coming to this church from the day I was born. So that's 88 years. And when I first came of age in this church, it was the late 1947s, early 1950s. And at that time, we were part of a three-church parish with Swamp and Reinholds. Swamp and Reinholds, Mellingers and Shennick, and us. And this building consisted of the sanctuary and the narthex. We didn't have a restroom. We had an outhouse out back, but we had a lot of young families with children. And by 1959, we decided that if we want to keep these young families coming, we need to have a restroom inside at least. So what we call the multi-purpose room was added, and we went that way. What is now the nursery was then the kitchen and the pastor's office, and that was it. But we still didn't have classrooms. We had Sunday school in those days was a big deal, and families came to Sunday school. We had this room separated by curtains. We had about 6 classes in here. We had 5 classes in the sanctuary, not separated by anything. So boys carry over, So we built this, and we still didn't have classrooms. But we continued on. And in 1993, we added the last wing. The classrooms out back, the new pastor's study, the fellowship hall, and then we had classrooms to operate. And all along the way, there were naysayers. In the 1960s, we became part of a 2-church parish. Zion and Akron became a 2-church parish. Well, that didn't last long. So in the 1970s, we became a single church. And all along the way, people said, we can't do that. We're too small. We don't have any money. I was a treasurer for over 11 years in the 60s. At that time, we didn't have any savings account. We didn't have any investments. All we had was our checking account. And at one point, we had 11 cents in our checking account, and that was it. And every time we wanted to do something, people said, we can't do that. We're too small. We don't have any money. But we did. And we're still here today. And we've been blessed all along the way with good pastors. And as Jerry alluded to, people who are willing to work and help out. And so that's where we are today. That's how we got here. That's about it.
Yeah. Sure. All right. Well, any questions for Paul at all? So our first building was on Apple Street, and it was this. And it was torn down in 1900. The bricks were used to make what's called the back church, right? Good Pennsylvania Dutch frugal people, right? They reused the bricks for the back church. The steeple is the same at the back church. One Sunday it would be the Reformed church, and one Sunday it would be Lutheran. The commonality was that the services were in German. And so you went to church every other Sunday. In 1900, the Lutherans bought their share, and the Reform moved a little bit up the street to where they are now. That church closed on Easter 2020. There's now an Egyptian Coptic Orthodox church that's trying to get started there. And then we built this building, the one that you're in right now, in 1900. Services were held in German in this congregation. The last services regularly were in 1928. What really kind of brought that to a close was World War I. So here is our sanctuary in 1918. And if you notice a couple of things here, there's a huge chandelier that's not there anymore. Paul, that was given to another congregation, I think. The pews are the same. The pulpit and altar and lectern are all the same. This here, the hymn board is the same. Those chairs, you can see them in the back of the church. You can't see them from where we're at right here, but a couple of them are in the back. And some new additions. On the banner here is these blue stars are members of Salem Church who were serving in the Great War, World War I. And if you notice over here, the American flag. Now, when it was made its first introduction into our congregation, the American flag, back then services were still in German, and we were fighting Germany. So we really did our best to emphasize our American citizenship, and the flag's been in there ever since. So World War I was when that was started. And I just want to share with you, in 1919, so a year after the Great War, this is when they were in a pandemic, by the way, Spanish flu. Paul, this is your great-grandfather, right? This is Paul's great-grandfather right here. And they did kind of a tableau, kind of a play. And this is like a World War I army camp in our sanctuary right here. Flag, stars. Here's our baptismal font. And coming out of the baptismal font are the flags of the Allied nations.
That's not my great-grandfather.
That's your grandfather. Okay. And his name? Addison Wechter, who I think his name is on our charter document. Okay. This is the pastor's chair. We still have that. And just to back up a little bit, when I was doing my doctoral studies in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I was doing some research on the church history. I just had some extra time. I like walking through the stacks. And I came across this. This is the minutes from the Ministerium of Pennsylvania. And this is the request from the people in Ephrata for a pastor to start a church here in what was known as New Ephrata. So here it is. At the same date, the president of the Ministerium of Pennsylvania, that's the Lutheran denomination in this part of the country, I received a letter of like import from Mr. John S. Hecker of New Ephrata, and that's what this was known as. It was actually its own village, right, Paul? And then became Lincoln. So this is 1856. I received a letter from John S. Hecker of New Ephrata. I directed their attention to, and then some pastors that they might consider calling. So that's kind of one of the first letters that we have mentioning the congregation. It goes all the way back to pre-Civil War days. So even going back further, we can point to this guy, Henry Muhlenberg. He's the guy who organized the Lutheran Church in Pennsylvania. Came from Germany, and there were a lot of different congregations here in eastern Pennsylvania, and he brought them all together under what was known as the Ministerium of Pennsylvania. That's his ordination certificate that he brought. Anyways, if you go to Trapp, Pennsylvania in Montgomery County, this is the church where Muhlenberg was called to initially, and then this was his home base of operations where he organized the Lutheran Church here in Pennsylvania.